The daughter they never introduce. Some families don't choose a favorite child. They simply make one feel invisible. I learned that long before I understood what the word meant. My name is Sophia Bennett. I'm 34 years old. For most people, my life looked perfectly ordinary. A quiet woman, an accountant, never married, no children, the dependable daughter who always showed up, the one who remembered birthdays, picked up groceries, helped with taxes, fixed everyone's laptop, drove relatives to doctor's appointments, and somehow, the one nobody ever talked about. Not because they hated me, because they'd become so used to depending on me. They forgot I was a person. Every Sunday, my parents hosted dinner, not because they loved cooking, because they loved having the family together. At least, that's what they told everyone. In reality, those dinners followed the same script every single week. My older brother, Nathan, arrived late. Everyone stood up to greet him. "Look who's here." Mom hugged him first. Dad asked about his sales job. My aunt wanted to hear about his newest client. My cousins laughed at his stories. For 20 minutes, the room revolved around Nathan. Then, someone noticed me. Usually my mother. "Sophia, could you help me in the kitchen?" Not, "How was your week?" Not, "How's work?" Just, "Can you help?" And I always did. People assume kindness is always appreciated. Sometimes, it's simply expected. One Sunday, I decided to count. Just as an experiment. I wanted to know how many questions my family asked me during dinner. Not questions about serving food. Real questions. About me. By the end of the evening, I had my answer. 0. Not one person asked how I was. On the drive home, I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it had become predictable. Monday morning, my alarm rang at 6. Unlike my family, my coworkers knew exactly who I was. At least, they knew the version I allowed them to see. To them, I was a senior financial analyst at a regional logistics company. Reliable, quiet, excellent with numbers. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Every day at 5, I left the office. Most people assumed I went home. Instead, I drove 20 minutes across town to a renovated warehouse beside an old railway line. There was no company logo outside, only a small silver plaque beside the entrance. Northbridge Analytics. Most people would walk past without noticing it. That was intentional. Inside, everything changed. Large digital dashboards covered the walls. Analysts monitored live data from companies across the country. Engineers debated software models. Project managers rushed between conference rooms. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet purpose. As soon as I entered, a receptionist smiled. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett." Several employees looked up. "Evening, Sophia." A young engineer hurried toward me. "We solved the forecasting issue." I smiled. "Show me." This place wasn't my second job. It was my company. I had founded Northbridge Analytics 7 years earlier. We built artificial intelligence systems that helped manufacturers predict supply chain failures before they happened. Not glamorous, not flashy, but incredibly valuable, especially after the global shipping disruptions of recent years. What began with 3 laptops inside my apartment had grown into a company with 62 employees. Annual revenue had crossed $28 million. We weren't famous. We didn't need to be. Most of our clients preferred privacy. So did I. People often ask why I kept the company a secret. The answer is simple. I didn't. My family simply never listened long enough to notice. 7 years earlier, I'd tried to explain it. Dad interrupted. So, it's another computer thing. I nodded. He smiled politely. As long as you're happy. Then he turned to Nathan. So, tell us about your promotion. That conversation never came back. Neither did my company. Tuesday afternoon, our executive team gathered inside the main conference room. A giant screen displayed one sentence. Project Horizon. Everyone knew what it meant. The biggest opportunity in our company's history. Our operations director, Olivia Chen, looked around the table. If we win this, we double in size within 18 months. The room became very quiet. Our chief technology officer, Ethan Brooks, switched slides. Atlas Manufacturing operates 142 facilities across North America. They need predictive AI across every location. I leaned forward. Competition. Olivia answered. 4 companies. Us. And $3 billion corporations. Someone whistled softly. Those weren't good odds. Then Ethan smiled. They have one problem. What? They've already tested the others. And they're looking for something different. I stood. Walked toward the screen. They don't need the biggest company. They need the smartest solution. I looked around the room. And that's exactly what we built. Meetings ended. People returned to work. Nobody celebrated. Because nothing had been won yet. Around 7, Olivia knocked on my office door. You've got another invitation. She handed me an elegant envelope. I opened it. My parents. Sunday dinner. Family reunion edition. Attendance expected. Food assignments included. Beside my name, someone had written in blue ink. Sophia main course, 2 desserts, drinks, and setup, arrive by 11 a.m. I stared at the paper. Nathan's name had one instruction. Bring yourself. I couldn't help smiling. Some things never changed. That evening, I called my mother. Hi, Mom. Oh, good. I was hoping you'd call. I got the invitation. Perfect. So you'll start cooking Saturday. I looked out my office window. The city lights stretched toward the horizon. Actually, I can't. Silence. What do you mean? I have something important next weekend. What could possibly be more important than family? I closed my eyes. The Atlas presentation. Months of preparation. Potentially the largest contract of my career. But somehow, I already knew how this conversation would go. It's work. Mom sighed. Can't someone else handle it? I almost answered. Then stopped. Because for the first time, I realized something. She still thought I was talking about my accounting job. She had absolutely no idea what my work actually was. And before I could explain, she said the sentence that changed everything. Sophia, you've always been so good at putting family first. Don't start changing now. The line went quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply whispered, I'll let you know. Then I ended the call. Back inside the conference room, Olivia was still reviewing Project Horizon. She looked up. Everything okay? I nodded slowly. Then smiled. I think I'm finally done making myself smaller. Olivia frowned. What does that mean? I looked toward the massive presentation waiting on the screen. It means next weekend. I'm choosing my future. And none of us realized that one decision would force my family to see me for the very first time, the weekend that changed everything. There comes a moment in every person's life when saying yes becomes more painful than finally saying no. For me, that moment arrived on a cold Saturday morning. At exactly 7:15 a.m., my phone started vibrating. Mom. I watched it ring until it stopped. 30 seconds later, she called again. Then Dad. Then my Aunt Linda. Then Nathan. By 8 o'clock, I had 13 missed calls. Not one message asking if I was okay. Only one question, repeated in different ways. What time are you coming? Meanwhile, Northbridge Analytics looked nothing like a weekend office. Every conference room was occupied. Engineers were running final software simulations. Designers were polishing presentations. Legal advisors reviewed contracts one last time. Coffee cups covered every desk. No one complained. Everyone understood what Project Horizon meant. If we won, our company wouldn't just grow. It would become a national competitor. Olivia walked into my office carrying 2 coffees. I figured you hadn't eaten. I haven't. She placed 1 cup beside me. You look distracted. I smiled faintly. My family thinks I'm skipping dinner because I don't care. And the truth, I'm trying to protect 62 careers. She nodded. One day they'll understand. I wasn't so sure. At 9:30, our leadership team gathered for the final rehearsal. The presentation lasted exactly 48 minutes. Not 47. Not 49. Every transition had been timed. Every financial projection verified. Every technical demonstration rehearsed dozens of times. When it ended, silence filled the room. Finally, Ethan smiled. I don't know if we'll win, but nobody in this industry is more prepared. That was enough for me. Just as everyone began leaving, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Hi, Dad. His voice was calm. Too calm. Where are you? At work. No. He replied. I mean, where are you really? I frowned. What do you mean? Your accounting office is closed today. For a second, my heart skipped. He had checked. I have another office. Another silence. What other office? I looked through the glass walls of the conference room. Employees moved confidently between departments. This company had become my second home. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. I'm leading a project today. Dad sighed. Sophia, you've always had a good imagination. I don't have time for games. I'll expect you here by noon. The call ended. He hadn't even waited for my answer. Olivia looked at me. Everything okay? I laughed quietly. He still thinks I'm making things up. She folded her arms. Then stop trying to convince someone who's already decided not to believe you. Her words stayed with me. Sunday morning arrived faster than expected. At 6:30, our executive team boarded a flight to Chicago. Atlas Manufacturing's headquarters occupied the top 20 floors of one of the city's newest skyscrapers. As our taxi approached the building, I looked up. Glass. Steel. Endless windows reflecting the winter sky. This was the kind of client companies dreamed about. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, professional, focused. A receptionist welcomed us. Good morning. Northbridge Analytics. I nodded. She smiled. They've been looking forward to meeting you. Those 6 words erased months of doubt. The boardroom overlooked the entire city. 10 executives sat around a long walnut table. At the center, was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and an unmistakable presence. She stood as we entered. "I'm Victoria Hale, Chief Executive Officer." She shook my hand firmly. "We've heard impressive things about your team." I smiled. "I hope we exceed them." The presentation began. For the first 10 minutes, no one interrupted. Then the questions started. Hard questions. The kind experienced leaders ask when millions of dollars are involved. What happens if the system fails? How quickly can forecasts adapt? How secure is the data? Every answer flowed naturally. Not because we'd memorized responses. Because we'd lived these problems for 7 years. Halfway through, Victoria leaned forward. "I've seen presentations from much larger firms." She looked directly at me. None of them explained the problem this clearly. I thanked her. But inside, my confidence doubled. After nearly 2 hours, the presentation ended. The executives asked us to step outside while they discussed the proposals. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. No one spoke. No one checked their phones. We had done everything we possibly could. The rest wasn't in our hands anymore. 23 minutes later, the conference room doors opened. Victoria smiled. "We've made our decision." Every heartbeat seemed louder. She extended her hand. "Congratulations. Northbridge Analytics has been selected as our national AI partner." For a moment, no one moved. Then Ethan actually laughed. Olivia covered her mouth. One of our engineers wiped away tears. 7 years. Thousands of late nights. Hundreds of setbacks. All leading to this handshake. As photographers entered the room, contracts were signed. Hands were shaken. Champagne was poured. Someone captured the exact moment Victoria handed me the final agreement. Neither of us realized. That photograph would soon appear on nearly every major business website. Back home, my family reunion wasn't going nearly as planned. Mom kept glancing toward the front door. She should have been here hours ago. Nathan shrugged. "She's probably embarrassed." Embarrassed about what? Missing another family event. No one questioned him. They simply accepted his version of the story. Then my teenage cousin, Lily, looked up from her phone. I think you should see this." Nobody paid attention. "Seriously. It's Sophia." Dad frowned. "What about her?" Lily turned the phone around. On the screen was a business news headline. "NORTHBRIDGE, Analytics, SCCURES landmark, national contract with Atlas Manufacturing." Below it, a photograph. A woman in a navy blazer shaking hands with Atlas CEO Victoria Hale. Mom leaned closer. Her eyes widened. "That looks like Sophia." Nathan laughed. "There are thousands of Sophia Bennetts." Lily zoomed in. "No," she whispered. "It's definitely her." The room fell silent. Dad took the phone. "Read the headline again." Then again. He clicked the article. There it was. Sophia Bennett, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Northbridge Analytics. Founder. Chief Executive Officer. The word seemed impossible. He kept scrolling. Company history. Industry awards. Growth statistics. Employee interviews. Everything had been public for years. No one in the family had ever looked. Across the country, I stood beside my team as cameras flashed around us. Victoria raised her glass. To new beginnings. Everyone smiled. I looked at my phone. 24 missed calls. Every single one. From family. For the first time in my life. They weren't calling because they needed something. They were calling because they had finally discovered who I really was. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because, after spending years waiting to be noticed, I wasn't willing to let the biggest moment of my career become another conversation about someone else's expectations. That evening, as our team celebrated in downtown Chicago, Dad sat alone in the family living room, the article still open on his phone. He whispered something so quietly, almost no one heard it. How did I never know? No one answered, because everyone in that house already knew the truth. They had never bothered to ask, the truth they could no longer ignore. Success doesn't change people. It changes what everyone else finally decides to notice. For 7 years, my family had barely asked about my work. Now, they wanted answers. Not because I'd suddenly become different, because the rest of the world had noticed me first. I landed back in Minneapolis late Monday afternoon. The flight had been delayed because of heavy snow. By the time I stepped into the terminal, my phone exploded with notifications. 32 missed calls, dozens of text messages, voicemails, emails, most of them from my family. One message from Mom caught my attention. Please call us, we need to talk. Not, where are you? Not, why didn't you come? Just, we need to talk. For some reason, that felt different. I didn't call. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed one quiet evening before reopening a conversation that had taken years to reach this point. Instead, I drove straight to North Bridge. Even after the biggest contract in company history, the office was buzzing with activity. Construction crews were measuring unused space. Recruiters were interviewing new candidates. Department heads were planning expansion. Winning the contract wasn't the finish line. It was the starting point. As soon as I walked through the doors, employees applauded. Someone had hung a banner across the lobby. CONJRATULATONS, Team NORTHBRIDG. I laughed and raised my hands. Stop. The room became quiet. You all know this wasn't my victory. It was ours. I pointed around the office. Every late night, every difficult client, every software update, every impossible deadline. We earned this together. The applause grew even louder. Not because of me, because everyone in that room knew they mattered. That had always been the company I wanted to build. After the celebration, Olivia walked beside me toward my office. You've got visitors. Clients. She smiled awkwardly. I don't think so. I looked through the glass walls toward reception. My parents were standing there. Dad held his hat in both hands. Mom looked nervous. I'd never seen either of them look uncomfortable in my workplace before. Mostly because they'd never been there. The receptionist smiled politely. They've been waiting about 20 minutes. I nodded. Thank you. Mom looked up first. The moment our eyes met, she smiled. A careful smile, as if she wasn't sure whether she was still allowed to. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Mom. Dad cleared his throat. We don't want to interrupt. You already have. He looked embarrassed. I suppose we have. I led them toward a small conference room overlooking the city. The moment the door closed, silence filled the room. No one seemed to know where to begin. Finally, Mom spoke. We saw the news. I figured. She looked around the office through the glass wall. Is all of this? And yours? Our team's? Dad looked confused. But you're the CEO. I don't build software. I don't write code. I don't meet every client. A company isn't one person. He slowly nodded. The answer surprised him. Mom took a deep breath. Sophia, why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at her quietly. I did. She frowned. When? The first year. I explained that I started a company. Dad called it another computer hobby. She looked toward him. He lowered his eyes. I continued. The second year. I told everyone we'd hired our first employees. Aunt Linda interrupted because Nathan wanted to talk about his new car. Nobody argued. Because they remembered. The third year. I mentioned we'd moved into a real office. Someone asked me to refill the drinks. I smiled sadly. So I did. The room became painfully quiet. Dad rubbed both hands together. I honestly... He stopped, then whispered, I don't remember any of that. I know. You were never listening. Those words landed heavily between us. After several long seconds, Dad asked the question I'd secretly wanted him to ask for years. What exactly does your company do? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after 7 years, he was finally curious. I walked over to the large screen on the conference room wall. Opened a presentation. Our software predicts supply chain failures before they happen. It helps manufacturers avoid millions in losses. I showed them real examples. Weather disruptions, factory shutdowns, transportation delays, inventory shortages. For nearly 20 minutes, they listened without interrupting. It was the longest conversation we'd ever had about my work. When I finished, Dad leaned back in his chair. So, all those times you said you were busy, you really were. I smiled gently. I wasn't avoiding family. I was building something. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I thought you were choosing work over us. I shook my head. No. I was choosing the future I'd spent years creating. There was a difference. Just then, someone knocked on the door. It was Ethan. I'm sorry to interrupt. The Atlas executives are joining the video conference in 5 minutes. I checked my watch. I'll be right there. He nodded politely before leaving. Dad watched him disappear. He works for you. Yes. He treated you. Dad searched for the right words. With real respect. I smiled. Respect is something we practice here. Before we left the room, Dad quietly stopped me. I owe you an apology. I waited. For years. I praised Nathan because I thought confidence needed encouragement. He looked down. And I relied on you because I thought strength didn't. He sighed. I never realized that strong people need encouragement too. I felt something shift inside me. Not complete forgiveness, but understanding. That evening, I accepted their invitation to dinner. Not a family reunion. Just the three of us. When I arrived, something immediately felt different. There were no grocery bags waiting by the door. No apron laid out for me. No handwritten cooking schedule. Mom opened the door smiling. Dinner's almost ready. I looked around. What do you need me to do? She gently shook her head. Nothing. Tonight, you're our guest. For a second, I honestly didn't know how to respond. Dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread. Nothing elaborate. Yet somehow, it became the most meaningful meal we'd shared in years. Halfway through dinner, Dad disappeared into the living room. When he returned, he carried a dusty cardboard box. I found this in the attic. He placed it on the table. Inside were old school papers, science projects, certificates. Then, he pulled out a photograph. I was 12 years old, standing beside a homemade robot I'd built for a state competition. I was smiling from ear to ear. Dad stared at the picture. I remember this. I looked at him. I won first place. He nodded slowly. I know. Then his voice cracked. I don't remember telling you. I stayed quiet. He continued. I remember taking Nathan out for ice cream after one of his baseball games. I remember every one of his trophies. He looked down at the photograph again. But somehow, I forgot the day you won this. He closed his eyes. I'm so sorry. Mom quietly reached across the table and held my hand. For years, I'd imagined this conversation. I thought it would erase everything. It didn't. But it did something more important. It finally acknowledged the truth. A week later, Northbridge hosted an open house for employees' families. Children toured the innovation lab. Parents met engineers. Students asked questions about careers in technology. I noticed Dad standing quietly near the back of the room, watching, listening, learning. He wasn't pretending to understand everything. He was trying. Sometimes, that matters even more. Near the end of the event, Dad walked onto the small stage without warning. He picked up the microphone. The room became silent. I won't keep you long. He looked toward the employees. I spent years believing I knew my daughter. The truth is that I only knew the parts I bothered to notice. He turned toward me. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for that. The room remained completely silent. Not because people were uncomfortable. Because they understood. Everyone wants to be seen, especially by the people they love. As everyone applauded, Olivia leaned toward me and whispered, I think this is the first chapter, not the last. I smiled. She was right. Because healing doesn't happen in one apology. It happens through hundreds of small choices. And the biggest one was still waiting for us. The legacy of being seen. People often believe success changes your life overnight. It doesn't. Success opens doors. Character decides what you do after you walk through them. For me, the biggest lesson came after everything I thought I wanted had already happened. Spring arrived with unexpected speed. The snow disappeared. Construction crews finally finished expanding Northbridge's headquarters. What had once been a small startup, hidden inside an old warehouse, had become one of the fastest-growing artificial intelligence companies in the Midwest. 6 months after signing the Atlas contract, our team had grown from 62 employees to 128. Walking through the office every morning, I no longer recognized every face. Oddly enough, that made me proud. Growth wasn't about having my name on the building. It was about creating opportunities for people who believed in the same mission. One Monday morning, Olivia knocked on my office door holding a navy envelope. She smiled before saying a word. I think you'll want to read this. I looked at the gold seal. The American Business Leadership Council. I opened it carefully. Inside was a formal invitation. Ms. Sophia Bennett, you have been selected as this year's recipient of the National Innovation and Leadership Award. Recipients are invited to deliver the closing keynote address before business leaders, entrepreneurs, educators, and community organizations from across the United States. I quietly folded the letter. Olivia crossed her arms. So, you'll finally have to stand in front of a few thousand people. I laughed. I'd rather negotiate another billion-dollar contract. She smiled. Too late. The ceremony would take place in Washington, D.C. For the next 3 weeks. Everyone assumed I was preparing a speech. The truth, I wasn't. Every version I wrote sounded like a business presentation. Charts, achievements, growth numbers, awards. None of it felt right, because none of it explained why I had started Northbridge in the first place. One evening, I closed my laptop, walked through the empty office, stopped beside the wall displaying photographs from our company's journey. The first rented desk, our first employee, the first client, the day we signed the Atlas contract. Then, one picture caught my attention. It wasn't a business milestone. It showed the entire team eating pizza on the office floor during our first Christmas together. Everyone looked exhausted. Everyone was laughing. That was the moment I understood my speech. It wouldn't be about business. It would be about people. A week before the ceremony, Dad called. His voice sounded different than it had months earlier. More relaxed. Less afraid. I wanted to ask you something. Sure. Your mother and I received the invitation. I smiled. I wondered if you'd come. He hesitated. We didn't want to assume. That sentence meant more than he realized. For years, my family had assumed everything. Now, they were asking. I'd love for you to be there. We wouldn't miss it. The ceremony took place inside a grand ballroom overlooking the Potomac River. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. Business owners, university presidents, community leaders, young entrepreneurs. Nearly 1,000 guests filled the room. Backstage, I stood quietly looking through the curtain. Not nervous, just thoughtful. Richard Hale, the chairman of the Leadership Council, walked over. You've become quite popular. I smiled. I hope they came for the free dinner. He laughed. I've watched hundreds of leaders accept this award. Then he looked directly at me. The ones people remember. Never talk about themselves. The ceremony began. Awards were presented. Videos played across enormous screens. Finally, my name was announced. Applause echoed throughout the ballroom. I walked across the stage, accepted the Crystal Award, thanked the presenters, then stepped behind the podium. I placed my prepared speech on the lectern, looked at it for a second, then folded the pages. I wouldn't be using them. I've been asked to speak about leadership. The ballroom became quiet. But leadership isn't where this story begins. It begins with a little girl who loved taking things apart. Some people smiled. My parents thought I was making a mess. I thought I was learning. Soft laughter spread across the room. For years, I believed success meant convincing people to notice me. So I worked harder. I stayed later. I solved more problems. I said yes to everything. I thought if I achieved enough, someone would finally ask who I really was. I paused. I was wrong. Because recognition doesn't create self-worth. It only reveals what was already there. The room remained perfectly silent. There are people sitting in this audience tonight who feel invisible. They're the employee who quietly fixes every problem. The daughter everyone depends on. The son who always sacrifices first. The friend who listens while nobody asks how they're doing. If that's you, please hear this. Your value isn't delayed until someone notices it. It exists already. I looked toward the front row. My parents were sitting together. Mom held Dad's hand tightly. They had no idea what I was about to say. I also want to thank 2 people. My mother and my father. Several heads turned toward them. They made mistakes. So did I. But courage isn't pretending the past never happened. Courage is choosing to build something better. They've spent the last year showing me that change is possible. And that's one of the greatest gifts a family can give. Mom wiped away tears. Dad lowered his head. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thanking them because I felt obligated. I was thanking them because they had earned it. The audience stood. Not because of an award. Not because of business success. Because hope is contagious. And every person in that room knew someone who needed to feel seen. After the ceremony, dozens of young entrepreneurs lined up to speak with me. One young woman waited until everyone else had finished. She looked no older than 22. I almost didn't start my company. She smiled nervously. My family said it wasn't realistic. I laughed softly. I've heard that before. She looked at me. What changed your mind? I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. I stopped waiting for permission. She smiled. I think I needed to hear that. Several months later, Northbridge launched a mentorship program for students from underserved communities. Every summer, 20 interns joined our team. Each received a paid scholarship, a mentor, and one promise. No one here will ever have to wonder if they matter. That sentence became part of every orientation. Not because it sounded good, because I knew exactly what it felt like when it wasn't true. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Sunday dinners continued. But they were different now. Everyone cooked together. Nathan washed dishes without being asked. Mom stopped assigning responsibilities before inviting people. Dad asked questions. Real questions. Not just about work. About life. Dreams. Plans. Some evenings, we talked for hours without mentioning business once. Ironically, those became my favorite conversations. One autumn afternoon, Dad invited me to the garage. I've got something. He opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside sat a dusty toolbox that had belonged to my grandfather. He placed it in my hands. He always said you'd appreciate this more than anyone. I opened the lid. On top rested a folded note, written in Grandpa's handwriting. Sophia, keep building things that make other people's lives better. The world already has enough people who tear things apart. Be one of the people who puts them back together. I smiled through unexpected tears. Maybe. He had understood me long before anyone else had. Years later, people often asked me the secret behind Northbridge's success. They expected me to talk about artificial intelligence, business strategy, innovation. Instead, I always gave the same answer. We built a company where people feel seen. Once people know they matter, they accomplish extraordinary things. One evening, after another long day at the office, I stopped by the small cafe where Northbridge had been born. The owner recognized me immediately. You still order the same coffee. Some habits are worth keeping. He pointed toward a young man working alone with a laptop near the window. He reminds me of someone. I smiled. I was thinking the same thing. Before leaving, I quietly paid for his coffee. No note. No explanation. Just one small act of encouragement. Because years ago, someone had done the same for me. Sometimes, a simple gesture changes more than you'll ever know. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. It wasn't asking for help. It wasn't reminding me about dinner. It was just a photograph. The family living room. Above the fireplace hung a new collection of framed pictures. Nathan's graduation. Mom and Dad on their anniversary. a family vacation. And right in the center, a picture from the award ceremony in Washington. Underneath, a small brass plaque. Sophia Bennett, founder, leader, daughter. Nothing more. Nothing less. For years, I had wanted recognition. What I finally received was something far more valuable. Understanding. If this story has taught me anything, it's this. The people who quietly carry the weight of everyone else often become experts at hiding their own. Don't wait until someone becomes successful to ask about their dreams. Don't wait until strangers celebrate them to tell them you're proud. Notice the people who always show up. Ask them how they're doing. Listen to the answer. Because the greatest gift you can give another person isn't money, or opportunity, or praise. It's letting them know they were never invisible.